welcome to Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Doof Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most nice and accurate work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
Yes, and we are back. Oh, it feels like it's been ages since we've done an episode, but I think it's just because it's not a bonus week for once.
Well, this is the start of a bonus week.
Ah, thank God. So a few episodes coming out this week.
Yes.
At the end of our previous episode, we left with Blake standing in a mirror, watching Jeremy close in on the unconscious Cabal. And this chapter picks up right from there, where the Cabal is completely at Jeremy's mercy, and Blake can only really just watch from the other side of a mirror, unable to do much.
Yeah, and there's a real sense of powerlessness about the way it sort of opens with the satyrs starting to sort of touch Rose.
Yeah.
Not in a necessarily super gross way, but just the fact Blake can't do anything about it and he just has to kind of stand there and watch it. It's very tough to read. Yes.
You do get this kind of impotent sense from Blake throughout most of this chapter, actually, where he kind of feels like he's... Did you ever play that team building exercise where one person has to put on a blindfold and the other person has to give them instructions to navigate through a minefield? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've done stuff like that. Yeah,
I kind of feel like Blake's the one trying to give instructions to the people in the blindfold because he's, at this point he's basically impotently watching, and then later on Evan is flying around drunk and Blake is trying to yell instructions at him quickly enough to keep him out of harm's way. You really get this overall sense of he really regrets his loss of agency here.
Yeah, I mean, in saying that, I think he and Evan, as in Blake and a drunk 7-year-old, probably work better than I've seen other people in real life. Two functioning adults work in real life. So, by that metric, I think they do all right.
Fair enough. I want to touch on a line here where Blake thinks, towards the start of the chapter, he thinks, certain individuals were immensely important to me. 4 or 5 of those individuals were now at the mercy of our enemy. The important line here being 4 or 5, because obviously the 4 would be, his 3 friends and Evan, and the or 5, the kind of person that he half cares about here, someone that he maybe thinks is immensely important to him, is Rose. And it's been a real roller coaster of emotions, of Blake's emotions regarding Rose this arc, right? It's...
Yeah.
And it's obviously not over yet. It's really interesting to me to kind of keep track of the way that Blake has felt towards Rose. And I'm not sure whether it's his feelings towards her dampening as the influence of the drains gets lessened on him, or if it's kind of the other way around, where now that he's back, this kind of drive to be the sacrificial lamb and the protector of Rose and the Thorburns in general is kind of forcing him to see her in a bit of a different light.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that had crossed my mind too, is maybe as he gets less insane monstery, he kind of defaults back to instinctively wanting to help Rose mode, which is, I mean, based on how this chapter ends, not really a good mode to be in at any point. To me, metatextually, I think the way that you really start this arc fucking hating Rose, and then it sort of softens up and you're like, oh, okay, it was conquest, and Blake's internal monologue becomes more and more forgiving of her, and I started to get there a bit too, and I think that's all just designed to make the ending to this chapter hurt even more.
Yeah, maybe that's... Yeah, you're right. That obviously kind of... It's interesting that Blake's... I mean, last arc ended with... Or this arc began with, I guess is more correct, began with Rose shutting Blake out, right? And that was obviously a pretty harsh act, and we haven't really interacted with Rose since then, but there has been this kind of vibe of them, or at least of Blake kind of earning his place a bit more, and so you do kind of expect that towards the end of this arc, they are going to reconnect. And I love how this chapter kind of continues that feeling and then just completely subverts it at the end.
I mean, to be fair, he's now found a place that he's going to be in for a long period of time. So, mission accomplished. He found a place.
Yeah, I suppose. Just a fun little beat is that all of the coterie, all of Jeremy's coterie seem to be carrying around various restraints.
Yes, some more lewd than others, which
Yes.
I like when Jeremy even draws the line at
Yeah, thank
that one
God.
where he's like, No, we're not doing that to Ty." And I
I
was
gotta
like, "Oh,
say, even though Jeremy is now proper in antagonist territory this chapter, I'm still really endeared to him. I mean, like, he seems so overly reasonable, you know?
oh, yeah, absolutely. Like he's nice and polite about the whole thing. I mean, God, especially compared to Rose at the end.
Yeah. He also gives Blake ample chance to kind of make some deals to help himself out, and Blake is just having none of it, of course, but
Hmm.
I quite like Jeremy's style as a practitioner. He's a fun character.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, he comes across as kind of laid back, which
Well,
suits.
yeah, makes sense, I suppose. So Jeremy, and his coterie kind of continue to chain up the cabal. Blake is relatively contained. I mean, he can't really do anything here, but also Jeremy doesn't want to break any of the mirrors he's in for fear that it kind of will accidentally release something that's worse.
Yeah, and again, there's a sense of how like neutralized or impotent Blake is because he's just sort of having to stand there, and Jeremy's basically like, "Oh, yeah, I'll chat to you when I'm done."
Yeah.
Like Blake is very much a not threat in Jeremy's
Yeah.
mind at this point.
And I'm not sure how much of an accurate read that is, because obviously Blake does cause some shenanigans to make himself more of a nuisance, but it definitely doesn't feel like he's really overtly threatening.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if Jeremy could have expected Blake to feed Evan in that way,
Mm.
like he does.
Yeah. So Jeremy kind of continues to attempt to bind the Cabal, including Evan, and Evan is about to get kind of sealed up in a little box. But Blake is able to give him some power, which helps him escape. And so begins an interesting little chase scene.
Yeah, and so I mean, the interesting thing here is Blake spends a while looking for something to cut himself with, because this is sort of his go-to move when things get really bad, is to just
Is
literally
bleed
leak out.
himself dry. Yeah.
Yep. And he can't find anything sharp enough until he eventually picks up the roller chair and uses that to smash the desk, which chips some wood.
Yeah.
But like the interesting thing here is as he's doing this, he sort of notes the roller chair and thinks like, and in the real world, it's what Rose is stuck in.
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, there's an interesting reflection here. He basically does sort of our sort of job for us and notes that it's what Rose is tied to, but it's what he can use to do something. And he wonders if there's something to that. And I mean, I tried to think of any situations where this has happened in the story, and I've come up blank. So if anybody else has some ideas, I can't see this as a bit of a trend. I just think it's a neat observation by Blake.
I mean, it might be the start of a trend, right? We might see more examples of this going forward.
I mean, either way, it's an interesting mechanic for how the mirror world works.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the idea of things being able to be used as thematic opposites is something interesting. Because obviously, we've been thinking about, for binding specifically, we've had kind of reinforced to us that opposites are the thing that kind of make all the magic work, right? That make protective magic work specifically. So the idea that opposites might play more of a factor in the themes that things associate with different objects is interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
I like the way that Blake rationalizes how he can help Evan. He kind of is fairly sure that because of his battle with the Erasure Demon, his connection to Evan was cut. But because of this, Evan is obviously kind of atrophying energy and needs to be shored up with spirits, just as Blake is being shored up with spirits. And so Blake is pretty sure that if he kind of offers power to Evan, Evan's going to instinctively absorb it. And through that, he can kind of give him a little boost. It just is a nice little bit of I don't know, like systems building.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. I think the interesting thing I started to think about as I was reading this was, so if Blake's giving this energy to Evan, what kind of energy would he be giving?
Yeah.
Like we've seen so much in this story, you don't just give raw energy, it's always themed based on whoever is giving it. And like Evan is full of like, I guess like freedom or movement spirits. He's all about being a bird. I was interesting. Like I just sort of had this interesting thought about like, what sort of what sort of spirits do we think Blake has in him? Like, I assume by now it's quite a menagerie, but
Yeah.
what sort of spirits gravitate towards Blake? I wonder.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm especially interested because I'm not sure whether it's Blake giving some spirits that are gravitating towards him, like giving their energy to Evan, or if it's him giving his, limited remaining essence to Evan. Especially because there's a moment where he tries to cut a tattooed part of his body, which obviously is kind of representative of the spirits, and it just won't cut. And so he has to cut somewhere else that will end up bleeding in order to give power. So it definitely makes me feel like Blake is bleeding himself out, not giving part of the spirit's energy, but kind of weakening himself even more.
No, I totally agree, but I don't think it's as cut and dry.
Yeah, that's fair. It's probably not a clear distinction between where Blake, starts and ends.
Well, I think like when he's full of these spirits, that impacts his energy, which impacts what he's giving to Evan.
Yes,
and I think Evan was able to give Blake those sort of escape instincts when he was this familiar, and I don't think that was Evan giving Blake those spirits. I think it was just that those were the spirits that were in Evan, and so that was the sort of energy Evan produced.
Yeah.
And I could see Blake being full of like tenacity.
I was about to say that exact same word. I think tenacity is the one word that describes Blake more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think that kind of suits. Like, Evan doesn't get better for this. Like, he's still really drunk, and that's very fun.
Yes.
Which probably isn't the sort of thing I should say about a 7-year-old, but he's dead, so it doesn't matter.
You're right. There are a few times throughout this chapter I think to myself, man, this is a really fun scene. Oh, wait, no, I shouldn't be enjoying this. This is a drunk child.
Yeah, but, well, he's a bird, so it doesn't count,
yeah.
I guess.
So it's a drunk child bird, so that makes it better.
Yeah. But, yeah, like, he doesn't get better. He just seems more able to fight through it, which is very Blake. So that's sort of what I'm imagining Blake's giving off right now.
Yeah, almost like... I don't know what the word for it is, but that kind of improvisational plan energy,
Yeah.
So Evan kind of starts drunkenly flying around, trying to escape, while Satia and Maynard and Blake all kind of follow behind him.
I mean, this is one of the most fun scenes in the book so far, I think. It's kind of hilarious while also being very tense.
Yeah, there's a moment that I really like where Evan's kind of flying along and then he kind of tucks himself into a little ball and just skids along the floor spinning around until he comes to a stop next to the mirror that Blake is currently in. And it's just it's like, it really has this kind of cinematic helter-skelter energy, which is such an enjoyable ride.
I really hope, I guess, I don't know if they can become familiar, get a familiar bond back, but I hope Blake and Evan manage to like sync up again a lot more in this story, because Evan's just so much fun.
Yeah, and they are a pretty good team, aren't they? Like, this is the first time we've seen them be a team in, 3 chapters? It's good to see them being back. Oh, sorry, not 3 chapters, 3 arcs.
Yeah, and especially they don't even have that familiar bond anymore. Their bond is severed, but they're still a very natural fit for each other.
Yeah, they just kind of
seemingly
work.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting bit. Blake kind of makes this declaration where he says, "Let me be the one who is drunk on the priest's illusions. I offer power, and I offer it knowing I might permanently change as a consequence." And this is kind of like, this is the part that makes me think Blake is just kind of knowingly playing back into the role that was carved out for him. Because he's doing this sacrificial lamb thing again. And I don't know whether it's like heroic or stupid. I can't quite decide.
Yeah, I mean, he's just such a trooper, Blake. I think maybe idiot isn't a unfair description of sort of what he does here, just because I don't think like just pleading in English to the spirits like this was ever really going to work. Otherwise people would do it more.
Yeah.
If you want to get the spirits on board, I think it either has to be simple or playing into existing things that the spirits do, like existing traditions and all that. But I mean, there is an interesting trend. Like, we've talked so much this arc about Blake's journey. Like he felt very different, and he started to feel a bit more and more like himself throughout the arc. And this is a bit of that, like the willingness to just throw his life force away like this is very old school Blake.
Yeah, but the thing that kind of makes me uneasy about that is saying he's starting to feel more like himself. I mean, like, that's not necessarily a good thing because the Blake that we know, the Blake that we know and love is the one that was so kind of dedicated to his, to his programming.
No, well, he talked about that a lot last chapter, like wanting to move away from his old patterns. Like that's what he sort of talked about as he started to. Well, maybe it wasn't last chapter, maybe it was the chapter before. But he had that whole speech about not wanting to go with his gut so much. And I mean, he said that, but then he's kind of been up against the wall since then, so he still had to do it. Although I guess when the pressure's on, I think the witch said the left side is a bit more okay. But yeah, I agree. Like we've sort of been saying he needs to start to pick and choose the bits of who he is, and it still doesn't feel like he's doing that.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, this is a theme that I think exists throughout a lot of Wildbow's works, right? Where his protagonists will constantly make decisions that are justifiable given the kind of context and the kind of unending stakes that they seem to find themselves in, right? And this has happened and been kind of commented on in story by a number of characters criticizing this of the protagonists of Wildbow stories, where they let themselves fall into situations where they have to constantly escalate like this, right? Or they have to constantly be making the move that they kind of don't want to make in abstract, but are forced to make because they've put themselves in these high pressure situations.
No, I mean, it's that whole thing. If you have to sort of make these decisions, or if you make mistakes, but it's like high pressure, it's sort of a bit forgivable. But if you keep ending up in these situations, eventually you have to take a step back and try and identify the pattern that keeps leading you to being in those situations.
Yeah, and I think this chapter, Blake doesn't really have an opportunity to do that. But,
no.
For example, last chapter, he had the option to stay with Mags or go and come to the house, right? Or he's even had the options to, when he was talking to Faisal, he had the option of getting out of this pattern, literally breaking out of this pattern, or kind of perpetuating it. And he's chosen the wrong thing each time. Like, I love the guy, and his heart is so in the right place, but he doesn't seem to have the meta knowledge to see that he could break the pattern in a few different places this arc, and he's just chosen not to.
Yeah, well, I mean, like even going back to the example I used before, he was saying, I don't want to repeat these patterns with Rose and Mags. Goes to Mags, and then he had that bit where he just ran off, and Mags was like, wait, what if you're in trouble? And he's like, no, I was too far away to answer. And I think that may have been the moment where it's like, okay, no, he's doing it again.
You know what might be the best thing for Blake is to get locked in a box with only his thoughts and have a chance to puzzle it out. So, I don't know, maybe he'll get that situation soon.
Well, let's see.
Well, we'll see. No spoilers. So Evan's running. We've gone off on a real tangent here.
Yeah.
Evan's escaping, and Blake is kind of chasing. And at this point, we get to a kind of Mexican standoff where Evan's hiding next to Blake, and the coterie that have chased kind of are scared enough of Blake that they don't want to get too close. Until they eventually break mirror. They kind of just start chucking stuff at Blake to break the mirrors that he's in, which gives them an opportunity to kind of get close to Evan. Until Blake pulls out a very interesting kind of galaxy brain level bluff.
I mean, this might be one of my favorite plays that Blake has done in the story that I can remember. Like this feels like top tier practitioner shenanigans, like knowing what moves you can pull and bluff and stuff.
Yeah.
And the way he words it, it's very cleverly spoken.
Yeah, he does this. He basically threatens to kill Dionysus, I suppose, is the way to say it. He says he says a bunch of things, but it ends with, I call on the tutorings of demons she summoned on my behalf, everything that was given to me, so I might know the words to speak, to kill a god. And that kill a god there is italicized, which is great, and it really lends it this huge amount of weight at the end of this little written paragraph. It makes it so powerful. I really love it.
Yeah. I agree. And I think it works because Wildbow doesn't overuse
Yeah.
Like the italics to highlight stuff. I mean, I've been reading a Matthew Riley book recently, which we've talked about on Media MD, and
Yeah.
you know, his love of the all caps to emphasize things once or twice a page really makes you stop giving a shit 50 pages in. I think Walbo strikes a much better balance of using these things for effect,
Yeah.
but not overusing them.
The sparsity is what really makes it work.
Yeah.
And so this bluff works, I suppose. I mean, it works from Blake's perspective. It kind of spurs this coterie into taking some action. They continue to throw stuff at Blake, and he does a real power move here. He catches one of the books that they throw at him, and then like brings it into the mirror dimension, goes to a different mirror, and then from that mirror throws it back at the person who threw it, of the satyr that threw it, and it's a real escalation of power, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new here. He reaches out of the mirror,
Yeah.
brings the book back in with him. I suppose that's kind of new.
Yeah.
Teleports to the scene and then throws it out, which is like a little bit new. But like I agree, the fluidity and kind of ease with which he does all three of these things it feels like a huge step up from anything we've sort of seen him do.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely feels like
Rose.
a step up, right? And it's kind of fun watching him. We've seen him do a few like spooky things that felt like he was playing into his, his bogeyman nature. And it's interesting.
Like threatening to kill Dionysus.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean the kind of stuff where he was like jumping around mirrors while he talked to people to kind of spook them out. Whereas this is a combat application of what he could do, and it's really fun kind of seeing him. I don't know, flex his muscles a bit with that stuff.
Yeah, well, I like how he thinks about the effect this would be having on his enemies. Like he sort of says that from their perspective, they threw a book at one mirror and suddenly it came back at them from a different window. Like that would be, like it'd be very easy to start becoming paranoid if shit like that was happening.
Yeah, yeah. No, it would make me. I mean, he's definitely embracing the spookiness now, right?
Yeah, and I mean this is the place for it.
Yeah, true. I mean, if you've got to go spooky on somebody, it might as well be the fucking weird, creepy monsters.
Yeah, I guess one thing we didn't touch on, but like was a little hint that was dropped on us, is that Evan had darker tints to some of his feathers on the edges, and Blake assumes that's because Evan was getting some drain energy alongside whatever else he was giving him, which is a horrifying thought.
Yes. Yeah, I think we kind of have hit that note before in this arc, although I don't know if we've mentioned it, where Evan has looked very, I don't know, disheveled, although maybe it was a bit ambiguous as to whether that's just a general lack of energy as opposed to kind of drain infection, I suppose.
I assume that was more just because he's leaking, like, energy and being short up by spirits. Like, it was just general spiritual untidiness.
Well, the drains has a hold on him now, so we'll see.
Oh god.
Do we think that's happened? I mean, Blake could have kind of accidentally forged a connection between the Abyss and Evan now, which is not something that's super great to think about.
He could have. I hope not. I hope it's just like the essence, like the energy of the drains that Blake had sort of leaking in, because I don't think I could cope with the idea of Evan being sent to the drains.
Yeah.
Although he probably would come back as a phoenix, which would be cool.
We'll see, I suppose. So Evan flies off to grab a mirror to kind of give Blake a bit more space to play with. And Blake tries to follow, but also the Maenad follows. And so there's another brief scuffle where Blake kind of cuts at the Maenad and makes contact with it and seems to kind of, slow it down considerably.
Yeah.
So now Evan has a mirror. Blake's with him. They head back up to the top floor to rescue the Cabal.
Yeah, there's one bit here which I want to read out, and it's probably a bit long, so I'll try and cut it down. But Blake basically says to Evan that he needs a mirror, and has Evan seen any around the house? And Evan says, I don't know, but I can walk, and he flies off as Blake is saying, wait. And we just had that whole conversation about what kind of energy and spirit Blake might be giving to Evan. Yeah, I think we're seeing here that Evan at least got some of his run off into danger without talking about it energy, because that's exactly what he just did.
The best kind of Blake energy. The don't wait to hear the full part of the plan, just go.
Well, and there's the bit later where Evan just sort of swoops down with the mirror and he's like plan C and just like kind of assumes Blake will figure it out, which is a very Blake thing to do as well, I think. Just
Well,
right, just yell out plan C and be like, yeah, he'll figure it out.
yeah, that's true. Although at that point, I'm kind of unsure whether it's Evan freestyling and trusting Blake to improvise along with it, or Jeremy pretending to improvise plans so that Blake kind of won't question it too much and will just go along with it. It's hard to. There's a definite point. There's a definite confusion about the point where Evan stops being real and starts being faked.
I mean, I didn't get the impression that Jeremy was impersonating Evan at any point.
Wait, no, there definitely is a bit where Jeremy is impersonating Evan because Blake thinks, like, Evan's voice sounded weird. Oh, it was Jeremy. Or, I don't know the exact wording, but something like that.
Yeah, no, I just assumed that he was expecting to hear Evan's voice and then it wasn't that and it took him a while to process it.
Maybe. Leave your comments in the discussion thread, folks. Anyway, we're jumping ahead of ourselves a bit. I want to talk about this one part where Blake and Evan are kind of heading towards the attic, and Blake is having a bit of a shouted argument with Jeremy. And Blake yells, "I can't stand by while you go after my friends." And Jeremy responds, "The same friends who locked you out," he asks, "who left you to rot? Extenuating circumstances," I called out. So again, Blake kind of coming around to Rose's side, which is great, and the wrong decision based on how this chapter ends. But it's interesting that around this point, Jeremy and Rose are making their deal, right? So if this isn't immediately, like, if they haven't already made the deal, in which case Rose is kind of hearing this and surely must be feeling heartless. I mean, I don't know. If she hasn't already heard this, she's hearing this and then is making the deal, which is even worse. Like, I don't know.
No, I don't think there's time between this and the reveal for her to make the deal between this. So I think she's already done it. But yeah, so for me, this really read as like Jeremy being like, "You sure you want to do it for these guys?"
Interesting. You think he's kind of warning him away?
No, I don't think he is. It's he probably just couldn't help but sort of bring it up. Like, on a second read through, this line is just sort of has so much more weight to it than the first time.
Maybe it's just Jeremy kind of being a dick to Rose and co by being like, "Yeah, you just sold this guy out, and he's so dedicated to you."
Yeah, that's a fair point. I was thinking of it in terms of Blake, but you're right. It could be more aimed at Rose and friends.
Sorry. So they make their way back to the attic, but it's empty, ? Blake is confused, follows Evan in the mirror, but turns out it's a trap. Jeremy has kind of trapped him inside a circle, similar to how they trapped Conquest. In fact, identical to how they trapped Conquest, because Rose has told them how that worked and how to trap Blake as a result. Jeremy and Rose have officially made a deal.
Yeah, and Blake specifically calls out that he has been trapped like Conquest, and I don't know. It's such an interesting line because we know that Rose is still being affected by exactly what's happened there. So it's an interesting parallel to draw, given how relevant that binding still is.
Yeah. Fair enough. So this is kind of a confusing moment, right? The way this all goes down.
Yes.
I think it's meant to be confusing because we're in Blake's point of view and he's being tricked, which I quite like. I like that we have these confusing moments and they're always kind of a bit confusing on your first read, but you really can get into them on your second read and be like, oh, that satyr is holding, whatever, which means that this has happened and that's happened. It's kind of interesting. It lets you puzzle it out to kind of delve more into what's happening while still giving you the feeling of like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of there because there is that moment where the mirror's coming down and then you hear Jeremy shout now and you're sort of like, wait, but what? And then obviously we have the reveal and it takes you sort of a few lines and Blake a few lines / seconds in his point of view to process exactly what's gone down.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, like, Rose and the Cabal just standing there at this point watching Jeremy close the trap, like, fuck, it's so cold. Should we touch on the... Oh, okay, cool. So let's talk about the deal that Rose and Jeremy have made, right? Because basically what Rose did was just make herself more trouble dead than she is alive, and that's her bargaining chip, which is, I mean, it's like, it's fair to hate on Rose a lot this chapter, but I think she's making some pretty good moves here. Basically, she just sets up a situation where she's reckless enough that they kind of have to come after her, and then she sets it up so that she can't be killed, and then the only option they have left is to kind of make deals with her to make her less reckless, which is a great, like, it's a big play, and I quite like it. All she really got was they all had to agree now to the terms of war, which she probably wanted to agree to anyway, but she just used it to get a bit more of an advantage over them. Like, it's good plays.
Yeah. No, I agree. This is dastardly. Like, my understanding is she's basically baited them into using this big play, which is Jeremy opening the house, to sort of get it out of the way. And now everyone's basically where they wanted to be at the start. So it's a real arsehole move, but it's a good one. I want to hate her for everything that's happened right now, but I have to admit, this is pretty fucking clever.
And obviously it's bad that the house is now seemingly, semi-permanently breached, I suppose.
Rose seems to talk about it as if it's not just going to go back to being what it was.
Yeah. But also it's kind of fair to think that, I mean, Jeremy doesn't, like, he's been talking about how this is a big move for him to make and he can't do stuff like this all the time. It kind of feels like Jeremy has been, at least on a large scale, neutralized, right?
Yes, which I don't imagine sits well with his god that they sort of got played like this. Like, I can't imagine this is a good outcome for him.
No, I suspect not.
But yeah, I mean, also just Rosa's whole mutually assured destruction thing here with the deal she's made with Barbatorum. Like, it's so, talk about conforming to that whole nuclear weapon analogy that Laird brought up in Arc 1.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like this was always the way it was going to go down, right? I mean, there's no way that Rose wouldn't set up some kind of vindictive plays to be made if they make moves against her. But I guess that's what you expect when you're going up against a Diabolist.
Pretty much.
Interesting reveal here is that Rose kind of reveals that, yeah, I am tainted by conquest, I know, and we decided to keep that because it's a power source. Which is an interesting move. It's an interesting kind of reveal on the fact that Blake has been so worried about this conquest taint, but it's something that they've looked at and decided is worth the risk. I don't know, it does feel like it might come back to bite her.
I hope so.
Come on.
No, yeah, I know. I'm trying so hard to control the various amounts of rage I keep feeling at Rose.
No, that's fair.
But I mean, for me, this is a classic, what I am dubbing an It's Worse Bow, which is when Wild Bow has a twist that's actually so much worse than all your terrible fan theories. Like we've seen this in some of his other works, but you sort of have all these theories about the conquest state and how bad it might be and how awful it might be doing, and it turns out the answer's worse. It's actually just Rose is just an arsehole, and she's using it, and she doesn't really care, and she's convinced everyone else to use it. Maybe she used the conquest aura to do that. I don't know. We don't know how she's spending her conquest points, but if it's keeping the others in line, I wouldn't be surprised. That seems like the sort of thing conquest aura could do.
It's worth kind of touching on the fact that we've always seen Rose as the one that was more willing to use others as tools, right? So it's not really out of character for her to be doing that with Blake or with Conquest.
Yeah.
So they've made a deal. Part of this deal is that Blake is now all bound up, and Rose and the Cabal just kind of leave Blake trapped in this circle, bound where he is, and that's that. This is just where he lives now.
Yeah, I mean, before she goes, Rose talks to Blake a bit and heavily implies that there's a bit more to him right now than he appreciates, which is fun. But yeah, I mean, obviously now he's trapped in this mirror with the threat that if he makes too much noise, they'll like silence Rune it up, so he can't. The noise can't escape. But I mean, this is like one of Blake's worst nightmares, right? Like, he's spent so much of this story talking about how he doesn't like to feel trapped, and
he's all about freedom,
as trapped as you can get.
Yeah.
I mean, like he even talked to Mags at the start of this arc about how he couldn't do her job because he saw that as too much of a trap. That's looking pretty good now, I imagine.
Yep. Yes. And I got to touch on one of the last things Rose says before she walks out, which is, "If it helps," she said, "we believe you now," which is so cold. Like, Rose is saying, you know what? You were right. You are someone that's genuine and feels true friendship with us and really cares about us. And you know what? I don't give a
Thanks for
shit.
your sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cold. But I kind of want to touch on, I don't know if this is, I don't know, like reading too much into it or something, but I kind of feel like it could have been worse here, right? Like, they made this deal in order to get Jeremy off their backs, and all they really had to give up was basically telling everybody how to beat Blake. Like, that's all they've really done, is tell everybody how to get around Blake's tricks, which, yes, is bad because it means that Blake is, greatly weakened, not as surprising to anybody. Cool. But all they're really doing is binding him. I mean, they're even kind of keeping him around. Like, it's shitty, yes, but I feel like it could have been a lot worse.
I mean, if it was anyone else, I might agree, but this is such a sore point for Blake that it's worse. I don't know, maybe they don't really appreciate that, which is a whole thing, but yeah, I mean, it does come back. Like, that has sort of been a recurring theme for me with Rose this arc, is I want to hate her so much for everything she's doing to Blake, but often I can see how, from her perspective, what she's doing is probably the smarter play. Like, and I think I on some level that makes me angrier because I'm not allowed to be angry at her. Because like a lot of what she does here, I'm like, I get it. I can see the tactics behind this. It's heartless, and you're an asshole, but I can see why you're doing it. Yeah,
and kind of beyond that, even, like, we kind of see that this chapter that she's been making some pretty smart tactical moves. And so it's hard to get too upset at her for making some good plays in what is obviously a terrible situation.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the other thing that we find out here is that the familiar ritual between Mags and Molly got completely fucked. So I'm glad just everything's going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun way to end off the arc, really, depending on what interlude we're looking at coming up. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So it seems like, at the end of the day, things in the house didn't go better for Blake being there, and in fact went much better overall. So you gotta wonder, do you think Blake made the right choice coming to the house instead of staying with Mags? Because it doesn't really seem like he did much here, you know?
He obviously bought a fair amount of time, which was time that then Rose used to bargain with Jeremy. But really the thing that turned it was the fact that Rose set up her Barbatorum Dead Man switch, right? Which presumably she would have had a chance to say anyway, because it didn't look like Jeremy was immediately killing her. He was chaining her up to talk to her.
I don't get the impression Blake accomplished anything here but annoying Jeremy, breaking a couple of, like, reflective surfaces, and giving Rose something else to give Jeremy to strike the bargain she was probably already going to strike with him. I asked that question before as if it was rhetorical, and that's because I believe the answer is almost certainly yes. He was better off staying with Mags.
Yeah. I wonder what he could have done with Mags. Maybe nothing, but maybe something. He definitely... I mean,
we don't know enough.
I think you're right that he definitely didn't... The only thing he maybe did here was endear himself to Evan, which might become relevant.
That's true.
Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, we don't know enough about what's gone wrong with Mags and Molly, but it's hard to believe, from the sounds of it could have gone much worse.
Yes.
From what little we've heard.
But on the bright side... Blake's back in the house now, so yay.
Just what he wanted.
Yep.
I know. Oh, so yeah, that sort of wraps up this chapter and sort of Blake's role in this arc, I assume. And I mean, I really liked how this chapter, there's a real sense of limits in what Blake can do. Like, I think like the recurring theme throughout this chapter is that Blake doesn't have much he can do, and of course that all comes together in the end here, where he's now trapped and there's literally nothing he can do about anything.
Yep.
And I mean, like that sort of even started last chapter, so I really like how we've sort of had the whole end of this arc come towards Blake being trapped. Right up until the point where he is. Yeah,
it's interesting because it kind of has been, we have this idea of the mirror world as like quite restrictive, but really this arc has kind of shown us that he actually has more freedom of movement in the mirror world than he ever really did in the human world, I guess we'll call it. And I like the idea of playing off how free he's been over this arc compared to earlier, and then how free he seems to be at the end of the chapter, which is 0. It's a great way to kind of give us this little bit of him just being able to zip around and kind of do whatever he wants and go anywhere and not really be in any danger, and then suddenly that's all yanked out from under him at the end here.
Yeah, I mean, these last 2 chapters really started to give us a sense of how limited things were in the mirror world when people just start breaking mirrors.
Yeah,
and
true.
that really started to take away the sense of freedom. And I mean, and to an extent, that is sort of the seeds have been being laid with that ever since he fought the AIs in 10.4.
Yeah,
3,
yeah, true.
Which sort of really stomped on him in the mirror world.
Yeah, I guess it kind of. Every time someone interacts with him in the mirror world, it's been building us up to this conclusion where his kind of renewed sense of vitality and freedom has been eroded by this arc.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think we've been slowly learning the limits of this world as much as the strengths.
And who knows what's going to happen next?
Well, I know you do.
Well, yeah, and everyone, people who've already read the story know. But for the rest of us, you have to wait for next time, or next time will
Probably
be an
the time
interlude.
after.
So yeah, the time after that. Before we wrap up the episode, though, we've had a discussion question that people have been leaving answers to, and this discussion question was: what form will Molly take as Mags's familiar? And we still don't know if or when that's going to happen.
I'm going to go ahead and assume, due to the way that this chapter just ended, is probably not going ahead. It sounds like it's already fallen apart.
Yes, but if it does happen, let's try and see whose answer is going to be correct. There were some really good answers in here, some that I really liked. And there are a few kind of repeated themes. I think, let's talk about this one. So the user SnezC kind of brought up a theme which a fair amount of users brought up, which is that Molly as a wraith had this vibe of injecting people with anger and negativity, right? Which a lot of people interpreted as a sort of venom that she seeped into people, and from there, a venomous or poisonous animal would be one that would make a lot of sense. So SnezC talked about a wasp or a hornet as something that fits Molly in the kind of venomous vibe, but also fits Mags in the sense that she is really the most dangerous when she's disturbed, and at that point she kind of flies off the handle and buzzes around messing with shit.
I also, and don't take this in a negative way, because this is a huge part of what I love about Mags, but she's kind of annoying and will buzz around your head to annoy you.
Yes.
I actually quite like this. I like that venom idea. It's very dark, but like it does suit Molly, and I think this is a good mesh of the two of them.
Yeah. It's good because you're right that she's kind of annoying in a way where, you know how a wasp or a hornet, you're kind of unreasonably angry at or afraid of them, right? Because they're so annoying and intimidating as insects, even though they're really not that big of a deal. Which I think fits Mag so well. She kind of has this too big for her boots kind of vibe.
Oh, just the way she gets up in your face. Like, that's exactly what wasp and mosquito and stuff worrying does. Yeah.
Another theme that I really liked that was in a few answers was Mags as someone who's kind of relatively, this isn't the right word for it, but kind of standard. She's not like crazy out there, right? She's a relatively straightforward practitioner, but she's not. She's kind of mangy and grungy, right? And so a lot of answers kind of suggested relatively normal animals for familiars, but ones that were kind of the grungy versions. So Groby 46578 mentioned kind of dogs and cats with that kind of junkyard dog or junkyard cat vibe. The ones that kind of bite the hand that feed them or are quite passive aggressive towards their owners.
Yeah, a bit of a disheveled, and yeah.
Yeah, something I really liked about Groby's answer was, and some of these answers talked about the way that Molly's powers might manifest. And so one that I liked from Groby was Molly obviously is kind of has a defensive vibe. So as a dog, this could manifest as a growl or a howl that kind of keeps bad things away. I quite liked.
Yeah. No, that's true. She's because she's quite. I mean, it's interesting trying to balance Wraith Molly versus original Molly when sort of talking about this stuff.
Yes.
And one thing that really defined actual Molly was that defensiveness and I wouldn't use the word territorial nature because that wasn't really what she was going for. It was much more protective. But dogs can be quite. You use them as patrol and stuff, and it's like I could see that suiting her. Yeah.
Yeah. The theme of Molly's defensiveness came up with a few other answers as well. So there was David L. Hunt who suggested a badger because Molly felt kind of like a den-dwelling badger, defensive but would be provoked.
I like that, yeah.
One I also really liked was by Nahima, who mentioned a fox. I really like this one as well. A fox gives me the same kind of vibe as a dog or a cat, where it's kind of relatively standard as an animal, especially, in parts of the world that are not Australia.
Yeah. Well, they're everywhere here too. We just don't want them.
Well, sure. But also kind of defensive and den-dwelling and kind of wily, which I liked. Gave me a fun kind of vibe. I think wily applies more to Molly than to Mags, whereas Mags is a bit more on the Blake side of rush in first and worry about it later. But I quite liked it. One other one was All-Seeing I-70 mentioned a spider, which again has that same vibe of maintaining a safe house and ensnaring things that get too close but not venturing out beyond the kind of safe territory too much.
Yeah, spider's a good one. Although it's like I guess we haven't seen too many familiars, but there's usually like I think Evan is like the smallest we've seen. Like I'm trying to imagine a spider-sized familiar, like the way that could be a bit of a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
for the spider as much as for the practitioner.
Yeah, what's the smallest? I guess Evan is the smallest we've seen, right? Although Laird kind of has a pocket watch familiar, right?
Well, that's true, but that was a very unique situation, I think.
Yes, it definitely feels like that.
Relative to what we've seen, yeah.
I wonder if you can have like a fly familiar or a mosquito familiar that it's very good at, I don't know, getting into small spaces. Or we're getting a bit down the rabbit hole now, I suspect.
Plankton familiar, that's the winner.
Yes. A molecular level familiar. Did you have any other ones that you really liked?
So there was a Stuck in Reddit Factories one jumped out to me. Where they talked about like bats just because of the whole vampire blood thing and Molly and Mags' relationship with the blood sacrifice.
Yeah, I like that. The idea of Mags, feeding Molly blood and therefore a vampire bat being a kind of representation of that. I also liked something that Stuck in Reddit Factory mentioned where if Mags and Molly, if Molly takes a bat form, that kind of has this interesting dark reflection of Blake and Evan, with Evan as a bird in a way that kind of suits the way that Blake and Mags have kind of been reflections of each other so far.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that.
Yeah, great answers, everybody. Great answers in our discussion questions. If you'd like to leave any thoughts on those discussion answers or anything else that we talked about this episode, the place to do that is in our discussion thread, which you can find linked in the description down below.
Yes, and if you don't like Reddit, you can also hit us up on Twitter, which is at MediaMD Podcast. That's where we can be found.
We also have an email, which is mediamdpodcast@gmail.com. We almost never mention it, but we do sometimes get emails on there. So, hey, maybe shoot us an email. You could. No one's saying you can't.
And if you don't want to use your, go back 15 seconds button and you miss that email address, you can find it and a whole bunch of other information at doofmedia.com.
Yes, you can see info about past episodes of Deep In Pact and episodes of Media MD, and also episodes of shows that don't even feature us at all. The Doof Book Club is about to come out. Is that right, Elliot?
Yes. I'm not sure exactly when it hits the the RSS feed for the Doofcast.
Yeah.
But it's we've done the live recording, so it should be fairly soon.
Yeah.
If it's not already out.
You know, Elliot, is there some way that people can like find out about when shows are going to be coming out?
That's a good question, Ruben, because I'm currently looking it up right now. If you head to doofmedia.com/calendar, you can
Yep.
find out when all this stuff happens. And if my page will load, I could tell you all about the book club.
But Elliot, what if I, as a user, have this user story where I want to know when things come out, but I never go to the Doof website, and also that calendar isn't in my local time zone. What do I do?
Sorry, you used the word user story, and that's very much upsetting.
I've triggered all the techies here.
No, I mean, the other solution is to become a Patreon, which is patreon.com/doofmedia, and one of the perks there you get is access to a Discord server where the very helpful Behamebot will let you know when everything's happening relative to you.
Yes, which is very helpful. And you know what? The Discord isn't just a place to get local time relative calendar updates. There's also discussion on all the great Doof shows in there, as well as just a bunch of stuff. There's a TV channel, movies, games, and all of Wildbow's stories, all the Doof shows. Basically anything you want to talk about, you'll probably find the right place for it in there.
Yes. And of course, speaking of Patreon, Wildbow does have a Patreon. We've mentioned it before, and we're going to keep mentioning it until you, listener who hasn't Patreoned Wildbow, does it.
David.
Yeah.
Do you think I got one? Do you think my guest has successfully picked a David who is listening to this right now who hasn't backed Wildbow's Patreon?
Well, I guess we'll find out.
Yep. Head to patreon.com/Wildbow if you want to support Wildbow's Patreon. And if our sign-off bits are getting that ridiculous, it means it's probably time for us to wrap up this episode. So we'll see you all for our next episode talking about 10.x, the interlude for this arc. And that'll be on Wednesday the 4th.
So we'll see you then.
Bye.